You're listening to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast with Mike Chappell and Dave Griffiths.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast, episode 288. I'm Matt Adams. Dave Griffiths is on assignment out in Philadelphia. We have fights, we have trade rumors, we have roster cuts ahead. Joining me to discuss it all from Beech Grove, the Dean of Indianapolis Colts football coverage, Mike Chappell. How you doing, Chap?
Good. How are you, Matt? Is it as hot there as it is here? It's just sweltering here in the Grove.
Well, we are in the air-conditioned studio here, so we're all right. I assume I will be interested to hear from Dave how things are out in Philadelphia. I just know here we're under the extreme heat warning in Indianapolis and as Beech Grove as well, and it's not a fun place to be right now.
Yeah, like in 4 or 5 days, it's going to be in the 70s, so go figure.
Yeah, I can't wait. And, yesterday it was fairly nice. Like, it was warm, but we had a little bit of breeze that came through, and it wasn't so humid. But today the humidity's here, so the heat index is up near 100 or over, and it's just not a fun place to be for man or beast.
Stay inside.
All right, so the Colts are out in Philadelphia, as I mentioned, and Dave will be out there. He's got a piece he's going to send to us. We'll have some more from him after that. We do know that the joint practice yesterday wrapped up a little bit early with some fisticuffs, Mike.
Yeah, following Dave, and I chose not to make the trip for a lot of reasons, but Dave and Brett Bensley were there, and I guess there was some chippiness early. And then it got to be real nasty when Zaire Franklin pounded Gainwell once or twice, and the second time, Jason Kelce didn't like it too much, and he kind of blindsided Franklin, and we had 150 people in the middle of the field pushing, shoving, and just being tired of each other. And afterwards, Zaire Franklin said, "This is how we practice." And to his credit, Kelce said, "It was a cheap shot. I shouldn't have done it." But this is the downside of joint practices. There is a major upside. There is. You get good work done that is sort of controlled, but not like a normal practice. The downside is you get guys that are trying to compete against different people, different teams, and occasionally it goes over the line. I mean, how many times? If there are teams that have joint practices there every week, there's reports of fights every week. The Bears and Colts had a few last week, but they were primarily in the second day when you're really tired of each other. So it's joint practices to me have more value than preseason games, but the downside is occasionally guys cross the line.
Now, one guy that we know made the trip but did not actually appear. I guess he was on the practice field technically, as far as he was walking on the practice field, but he didn't actually suit up or anything like that, is Jonathan Taylor. And since last week, I kind of called it a couple weeks ago, the soap opera As the Horseshoe Burns with this thing with Taylor. We know he was out there in his hoodie, kind of walking around as we've seen him before. But we've had some major developments since the last show. So tell us, Mike, a little bit about the trade that he wants and kind of what you think the team wants as an asking price.
Well, he wants to go anywhere. He's made that very clear. It really seems like Taylor and the Colts have reached the point of no return to where it just might not work for him to be here. And what came out is that the team has given him and his agent the ability to seek a trade. Now, what people need to understand is the Colts have always, in the last month, they've listened. They've had the phone lines open. They just haven't been calling. They've been accepting calls, and if people call, what do you think? What would it take? But this is different because you remember in late July when Jim Irsay and Taylor spent an hour on Irsay's luxury motorhome. That's when Taylor requested a trade, and shortly thereafter that night, Taylor said, or Irsay said, "We're not going to trade him, not now or not in October. That's a certainty." Well, that's a change. So this is a change to where they're allowing him to really, okay, go out there and see what you're worth. You think you're worth X, we think you're worth whatever. So they're giving him a chance to go out there and see what it's going to take. And this is where it gets complicated. The devil's in the details. I've been told, talking to someone with the team, that they want at least a 1. which or something equivalent to a 1, a 2, and others. Christian McCaffrey got, what was it, a 2, 3, and a 4 in this year's draft, and a 5 next year, 4 draft picks. I think the Colts would take that and not blink. But to me, the difficult, phase that has to be answered is the new team signing Taylor to the extension that the Colts won't sign him to. I've heard 3 years, $40 million. Well, if some team's going to give up capital for him, they're going to want to re-sign this kid. And it's not going to be inexpensive. We've seen that here. Although people need to understand, the Colts never offered Taylor anything, and we've talked about that, which in my mind is strange, but that's the dynamics we have. But to me, the two stumbling points in a trade, and this is if some team gives suitable compensation, is that team signing him to an extension that's going to be, I don't know, $12, $13, $14 million a year. And let's not forget, he's not practicing. He's still on PUP with his ankle situation. He's going to have to pass a physical before he signs with the new team. So it's, to me, the simplest part is going to be the Colts accepting whatever they accept. They want a 1. Do they get to the point they just say, hey, we're done with this, and they dump him, and it's a fire sale? Maybe. I don't think they're anywhere near there yet. But if they get the compensation they can live with, number 2, you've got to sign him. And number 3, he's got to pass his physical, which right now he has not done.
There are just so many layers to the thing with the injury recovery that has kind of been the roadblock for him to get back on the field for the Colts. But then obviously the contract thing is there. And then you would need a team, as you mentioned, that would have the draft capital in order that would satisfy the Colts. But then that team also would have to give the longer-term contract to Taylor, also knowing that no one's actually seen him on the football field for a while because of the injury stuff. It makes it, I mean, it puts, we have said many times here on the podcast that, both the Colts and Taylor are kind of culpable in this thing because there's just no good resolution for this.
Yeah, I think the resolution is difficult because, again, as we've talked about, both sides are kind of right. Neither side is really wrong, but one side is stronger, and that's the Colts, and one side has the leverage, and that's the Colts. So, and we'll get to it in a little bit, but what's really important is there's a deadline coming up next Tuesday when rosters are cut to 53. And at that point, let's say there's no trade. At that point, either Taylor passes his physical and he's on the 53, or he stays on PUP and misses at least the first 4 games. Now, how does that, advantage anybody? So I've always said, and people are very clear that deadlines spur actions. Well, we got a deadline coming up Tuesday. I initially thought that, maybe a month ago that he would be in the opening day roster because it made no sense for him to sit. But now I'm almost convinced there will be a trade. And it might even be, like I said, the Colts just dumping him, just getting him out of the building, because this thing has really gotten to be how they're really, really far apart. And it's really strange how they've gone from, again, back in April, he said, I signed a 4-year contract. That's my obligation. I put pen to paper. To basically, I'm not playing there. That seems like what the indication is. And not to get too deep into the Taylor thing, but I know his agent's taking a lot of grief, and probably he should. But Jonathan Taylor, he is driving this bus. He is. This is his wishes. All that's been done is his wishes. So, what's really interesting, when you watch, it appears the Miami media really wants Jonathan Taylor with the Dolphins. They're really pushing that. And I tell you, you put him with that offense, wow. But are they willing to give that kind of money? The draft pick, if it's a 1 or a 2, if he's what you think he is, it's worth it. You're not going to get his quality of talent in the first round next year anyway. But it's to me, the contract is the big thing. I don't know why he would agree to go anywhere on a 1-year rental and play out the year for 4.3, And even if he would, no team's going to give a first or second round draft pick for a guy that might be for 1 year. So again, there's so many things working against both Taylor and the Colts. Hopefully within a week we'll know how this is going to be resolved.
And you would think that, I mean, it would be best for Taylor as far as trade value for the Colts would be to play, because if he plays and he's healthy and he shows that he's healthy, then that would only help his trade value, or maybe even reassess to the Colts how valuable he could be to them. But I think by this point, I think we're beyond that point now.
Yeah, I mean, again, he wants top value, which I understand he should, but he's also saying, I want top value, but I'm hurt. And you know, he had surgery in January, and everyone, even him, expected that this would be, you know, the recovery would be over rather quickly, whatever rather quickly is, a month, 2 months. Well, we're past 7 months, and that's why it's let's say a team expects him to, you know, agrees to an extension, but then he's got to pass his physical, and you know, maybe he does very quickly. I don't know. But like you said, there's so many tentacles on this thing, and they all have to sort of be in unison for it to work.
And from another team's perspective, I mean, if you can get Taylor for, even if you have to give up some draft picks, you are getting a premier running back here. He's only 24 years old. He'll be 25 in January, and he's in the prime of his NFL career right now. Now, I know that's fleeting for any NFL player, especially a running back, but especially if you're that team that thinks, we're one great player away from, being a real factor in the conference or maybe getting over the hump in the Super Bowl, he would have to be an attractive piece.
Well, again, when I hear people say, "Well, he's just another running back," no, he's not. He's top five, he and maybe higher than that. I saw a stat where he's averaged 5.1 yards in his first 3 years. That's the best in NFL history for a player's first 3 years. So and it's not been that long ago that he rushed for 1,800 yards and a zillion touchdowns. But then the argument is, and the Colts didn't win or didn't reach the playoffs. So what's the value of a running back? So, but it's really the timing is just bad for Taylor in the valued market, and you're asking a team to trade for a massive player for a pretty good sized contract in August, not in March when you're building your franchise and building your roster. So, but it only takes one team to show the interest, and again, I think it's to the point that if a team is willing to give something more than that, if they're willing to sign Taylor to a new contract, I think it gets done, because I think the Colts will come off the one. You always ask for a lot because that's what you do. But it seems like this relationship is the point that they will take. Now, they're not going to give him away for a fourth or a fifth. But if you can get a second and something else, I think they take it. Because this seems like this player has decided, I'm not playing in Indianapolis anymore.
Yeah, I guess I would think a second round pick and a couple other additional draft picks on top of that, if they could get that out of there. And it's just one of those things. I mean, from a Colts perspective, last year was miserable for the team, for the fans, for everybody. I don't think there's any argument about that. And people just wanted to get past that. They got the new quarterback in town with Anthony Richardson. They just kind of wanted to wipe the slate clean. And then you've got this Taylor stuff just hanging over everything, and it has dominated the conversation for the Colts this year, which I think is really unfortunate.
Well, and as bad and as chaotic and circus-like as last year was, he wasn't awful. He the ankle limited him, the offensive line bothered him, the passing game hurt him, and he averaged, 4.5 yards a game, 860 yards with a really bad offense. So I really don't like the narrative where people start trying to tear him down. He's an elite player. He's 24, for crying out loud. Now, one thing that can't be denied is running backs sort of have, we talk about the short shelf life. He had heavy work at Wisconsin. He did. And the Colts have worked him pretty good. And that's what's kind of funny is when all this is going on, we've talked to Irsay, is, what you've come away with is, we're not going to offer you a new contract, but boy, we think you can beat Anthony Richardson and what Marshall Faulk was to Peyton Manning. we really think you can help him and be a big part of our offense. And then we'll talk contract next year. If I'm Taylor, I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Why would I let you work my tail off and then I'll be an old 25 next year? To me, that would not help his value. And if I'm Taylor, I'm not trusting the Colts that you'll give me a new contract next year if all things go well. Because what they might do is just franchise him. And if I could get 2 more years out of Taylor, I would be fine with it. 5 years of an elite running back, and then you move on. Look at most of the running backs, and that's as long as you're not Frank Gore and maybe Derrick Henry. 5 years is a good career for a running back for a team. But I understand Taylor, like we've talked about, it's a short shelf life. He wants as much as he can get now because he's seen how teams throw away running backs.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no question about it. What we've seen with a couple of the other running backs in the league this year and the franchise tag and how teams can just kind of use that as leverage on these guys, and pretty much they have no choice but to play. So their only options are to, as you've mentioned before, withhold service, ask for a trade or demand a trade, and that's kind of where we are with the Colts and Jonathan Taylor right now. So, but like you said, the deadline's coming up for the roster cuts on August the 29th. That's next Tuesday. And so there will have to be some sort of motion there as to whether or not he's still a Colt and whether he ends up on PUP and all that stuff. So the Colts have their final preseason tune-up against the Eagles on Thursday night. That's why they're out in Philly. That's why they had their joint practice yesterday. They'll be at Lincoln Financial Field, 8 p.m. kickoff. The game is actually not on our air this time. It's on Prime Video, Amazon Prime Video, and then I believe WRTV is picking it up locally. And, we didn't see Anthony Richardson play at all against the Bears in their preseason game after 2 pretty intense days of practice there. But I guess after a truncated practice and a fight in Philadelphia, they're gonna put him out there on the road team.
And he needs to. I would have. It's kind of funny. I would have played him against the Bears. But my reason was different. Reps. I understand that, but I would have put him out there just to come out of the tunnel and experience coming out of the tunnel, leading the offense, and hearing the crowd go bonkers as it would have. And then I would have had him run a very vanilla 3 plays and then sit down. So from advancing his career standpoint, it wouldn't have done much. But it would have just given him a chance to be announced for the home fans. But now he's going to play in Philly probably, I don't know. We always say a quarter or a quarter and a half. It's really more plays. It's like 15 or 20 plays. If you tell him 2 series and you go 2 3-and-outs and you're done, that doesn't work. And he'll play, the offensive line will play as much as he does. You're not going to put him out there behind the backup lineman, although there's a chance, I guess, Ryan Kelly doesn't play. He came back to practice limited. Will Fries is still out, so you're not going to put him in there and do exotic things with the backup lines. But he needs to play. He does, and you can get him experience where he sees things, this, that, and the other, and protect him if the line's not holding up. So he'll play. And Steichen said that selected starters will play. That to me, that means more will play than won't play, and they need to. This isn't a team coming off a Super Bowl. This is a team trying to get its act together, and there's very, very few players on this team that are secure. And I shouldn't say very, very. There are only a few players on this team that are secure in their spots. There's a lot of things open to be decided on the roster cut down, so they'll play more than certainly they did last week, which very few played last week.
Yeah, I was really surprised. I thought that a low-risk plan for Richardson for their last game against the Bears would just been maybe a couple handoffs or a couple RPOs, something like that, a 3rd down pass. If they converted it, then they would continue the drive. If not, they'd punt, and then he'd put the cap on the sideline and call it a day. I thought that would have been good for him, for the home experience, and then also for the home fans. It's good, though, to get some experience either way. The reps are important. So I wrote that I thought he'd play a series or 2, and I hope that it's just not 2 3-and-outs and called a day. I hope they were able to get some sustained drive out there, something where he's on the field for 9-10 plays, something like that, so they can kind of put something together.
That's what they'd like. That's what they'd like Thursday is put together some drives where you're actually getting something done, getting some third and long, some third and short situations, and you get those in practice. But it is not the same. I had a nice long talk with Peyton Manning last week about the fact that they've made him the starter, and he applauded it. He was a guy that from day one he was the starter. Now again, it's apples and oranges. I'm not comparing Richardson to Peyton Manning or Andrew Luck by any stretch, but he just said that you learn so much from playing as long as you're not getting your rookie quarterback beaten up, as famously Houston did with David Carr. So it's value, and so that's one of the reasons I think going with Richardson is a good idea. And getting quality reps against a great defense on Thursday is the next step in that.
And it'd be nice to be a primetime game. It's the only thing that the Colts have remotely looking like a national game this year. I guess they do have the Germany game, but that's not a primetime game for the U.S. audience.
You're coming off a bad team when you got a slew of 1:00 games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a coverage standpoint, for all of us, who cover the Colts and stuff, that works out well. It's appointment TV, but for your franchise, nobody's seeing you.
I always harken back to the Manning days. They had 5 or 6 8:30 games prime time, and I'm telling you, how many times when I was working at the Star and we had deadlines, when you actually had deadlines, and the game it just filters into 11:30, 12 o'clock during the Tampa Bay game with the big comeback, got over it 1:00 in the morning. So that's the primetime games are great for the franchise, not so much for the local media.
No, I remember, and that was that was pre-Twitter era, or pre-X era, whatever it is now, for the Colts. So you really relied on your local sports coverage if you weren't able to stay up and watch the game. Most people were done, in the third, fourth quarter of that game against the Bucs, and I stayed up and watched the whole thing. I worked on a morning show at that time, so it was not very smart to stay up and watch the game, but I did. And when I came in the morning, the next morning, my coworkers had not seen that the Colts had won, and they were like, "Oh, sorry about this." It was like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. We're sorry about this. Too bad that they lost. I'm like, no, they came back and won, and nobody believed me until they went to ESPN.com and NDStar.com, and then they saw the game write-ups, and they're like, "Oh, I guess they did win."
35-14 with 5 minutes to play. It's virtually impossible to overcome that, yet they did.
Amazing. Just one of my like I said, just from a fan's perspective, one of the most amazing game I'd ever seen the Colts play and have to come back from. Do you think, Mike, just going back to the preseason game, do you think we'll see Buckner play, DeForest Buckner, or do you think they'll just go ahead and sit him?
I would sit him. He's had that foot, and again, he's a good example of why a joint practice really suffices for work. In a preseason game, you don't need it. It was encouraging that he came back because he had missed, 2 weeks. I don't think he plays. And there's probably a handful of guys that don't play. I think offensively, most of those guys will play as long as Richardson plays. If you're going to play him, play guys he's going to be with. Defensively, maybe a Kenny Moore. I don't know. I can't think of too many defensive players that I wouldn't play other than Buck. Shaq Leonard won't play. He's still in concussion protocol, which we need to keep an eye on that because this is not his first concussion. It's his second at least. I don't know if he's had 3. He's at least had 2. It kept him out of the upset of the Chiefs in Arrowhead several years ago. So, but no, I will be surprised. That's a good point. I don't think Buck plays.
Yeah, I don't think so. And he's about the only one that sticks out in my mind that I would say just definitely don't play him. Now, I do think anybody who's even got like a mildly nicked up at all, you don't play him. But if you can't have your starting offensive line out there, you definitely want that out there.
And you've got in our outline here about the tight end room and all that. That's interesting because a couple of those guys, Mo Ali Cox came back and Jelani Woods, I believe, came back to practice.
Yep. And Ogletree has been back too. So
I thought one of them didn't come back. I thought Ogletree wasn't back yet. But if those guys are one practice into their rehab, do you put them out there Thursday? I mean, it clouds your evaluation when they're not there. But at the same time, I don't want to risk a guy who's sort of just coming back from an injury, whether it was whether it was an ankle or a hamstring or a shoulder. So it'd be very interesting to watch the tight end rotation on Thursday.
As briefly mentioned a couple of times in the show, the cut down to 53-man rosters is 4 p.m. on Tuesday. So this is a good segue to just get right into it, Chap. Tight end room, not to put you on the spot, but also to totally put you on the spot. What's your tight end room looking like? Who do you think? Do you think they'll go with 4 guys, and who do you think they'll be?
Yeah, I think they do 4. With the injuries, it makes it hard. Mo Ali, Jelani, Ogletree, and Colin Granson, I think, and then Will Mallory to the practice squad. Remember, practice squad players have to be waived first, so there's no assurance a guy that you let go on the cut day is back with you. But I think they like 4. And again, the problem is that Mo and Jelani Woods and Ogletree, they've all missed significant time in training camp. So maybe the one that's most at risk will be Ogletree because he's coming off missing last year. But I think to go with 4 tight ends, and those are the 4 if I had to speculate, those would be the 4 I'd go with.
Well, it's really interesting because, of course, part of it's because he's been healthy. But Granson's really flashed for a lot of people this offseason in OTAs and in camp. Most of that's probably just been because he's been able to be out on the field, whereas Mo Ali Cox and Ogletree and Jelani Woods, we've not really been able to see him out there. But going into the season when they drafted Mallory, I was thinking, well, I think Granson's probably going to be the odd man out here. But because he's been healthy and he's played well, from what I've read in the practices and such, I think he's going to be here. So I think I have about the same tight end room that you do. I've got Mo Ali Cox basically because of the experience. He's your blocking guy. Jelani Woods is your biggest playmaker. Granson gives you a little bit something different from some of your other tight ends. And then it's really between Ogletree and Mallory for that final spot. And I had leaned toward Ogletree on that, with Mallory going to the practice squad is what I had written down. If it goes the other way, I'm not going to be completely surprised. I do feel like, not to pick on the guy too much, but I feel like, in the preseason, you either want to be noticed or for something good, or you don't want to be noticed at all. And unfortunately for Pharaoh Brown, I've noticed him a couple of times in the preseason games because he's picked up some killer penalties. And then he got kicked out of practice the other day too. So I don't know that he's going to stick.
Yeah, they always say that if you're one of those borderline players, don't draw attention to yourself. Don't give them a reason to cut you. And I getting thrown out of practice isn't going to be one of those reasons, but it looks like it's going to be hard for him to find a spot here, which, again, they've had good competition. They got a lot of bodies. Well, they've got a lot of bodies because they've had a lot of injuries at the spot. I just don't know that he makes this roster.
All right, and then wide receiver is another one. There's a little bit of intrigue there, and I don't think this would have been too much of an intrigue. I mean, there would have been a little bit, but we know who the top 4 guys are going to be. You're going to have Michael Pittman Jr., you're going to have Alec Pierce, Isaiah McKenzie, Josh Downs. I think all 4 of those guys are absolute locks for the roster without a doubt. Then the 5th guy would have been Ashton Doolin, without question. Great special teams player, absolutely fantastic special teams player, really nice complimentary wide receiver in certain situations. But now he had that injury last week. He's done for the year. I don't know if they're going to carry 5 or 6 wide receivers, but do you have any of the favorites of kind of the guys that are remaining?
Everybody wants Mike Strawn. Remember Reggie called him, was it Megastron? Because he's such great size and he reminds you of Calvin Johnson physically. But he makes the great catches and he doesn't make the routine catches. The other day he was slowed down by a leg injury. I just don't know that I think he hasn't done enough in my mind at this point in his career to say, this is his 3rd year. Has he done enough? I don't think so. The interesting one is they just signed James Washington. He's got a resume, doggone it. He's a 2nd-round pick of Pittsburgh, was it 4 or 5 years ago? Injuries last year. Makes a great catch from Ellinger against the Bears. It would be unusual, I think, to pick up a guy so late in camp and have him make your roster, but I'm going to keep my eye on him being that 5th receiver.
I think I feel along the same lines. The guy basically just came off not off the street really, but just kind of came into practice, and went out, played in a preseason game, caught a big pass, and he's got a resume, some experience, and I think it's intriguing. If you can find a room for James Washington on the roster, I think you should probably do it. If they do go with 6 receivers, I think maybe they keep Strawn around, but it's just kind of that clock has been ticking on his development, just to kind of waiting for him to turn that corner, and it just still hasn't happened yet. He'll have that highlight reel play. Catch, he'll jump over somebody, he'll go up and high point a ball, but then when it comes to just kind of a routine play, then it's just not there. And I don't know if the Colts are going to continue to have their patience. I guess it probably depends on how much Reggie Wayne likes the guy, and I know that Reggie likes him, so I guess we'll just have to see.
This is one to me where when they start figuring out the roster, you really need to rely on your position coaches. Trust them. That's why they're there. Listen to Tony Sperano on which linemen he likes, and Cato June with the linebackers. You have to listen to those guys, or what are they doing? And Reggie works with these guys every day on the field, in the classroom, in the locker room. So listen to your position coaches, and he does like Strawn. I just don't know that Strawn's done enough to warrant a spot in the 53.
Yeah, we've kept waiting, and the patience at some point just has run out or will run out. And then another thing that I keep thinking about is, do you think the Colts are going to carry 3 quarterbacks on the roster this year?
Maybe I probably, only because in my mind I sat down and just started looking at cutting the roster to 53. I got down to 43, and then I'm thinking, who are these last 10 guys going to be? Because nobody really jumps out that they need to be a roster spot. And if it's, do you keep Ellinger, or do you keep an extra DB or linebacker? Then you keep the quarterback. Could he be on the practice squad? I suppose. Just keep in mind, whoever you put in the practice squad early in the week, they're a free agent. They're free for anybody. It just depends on whether the Colts think they need that insurance of a third quarterback. It's not like if you waive Ellinger to go in the practice squad, somebody's waiting for, hey, can't wait for Ellinger to be on the waiver wire, we're going to claim him. But I'd say yes, but not, I'm not using ink in my roster cut down. So, and one thing we need to keep in mind, the roster cut day to me is the cruelest day of the year, because one of these guys who's just fighting his rear end off to have a career is going to make this roster. He's going to be that 53rd guy, and he's going to call home and say, "Mom, I made it. Our dream came true." And then the next day, the Colts are going to claim 2, 3, 4 guys on waivers, and that guy's going to be cut. So I really believe the Colts are going to have, there's 3 or 4 guys on other teams that are going to be here next Wednesday. I really believe that. A lineman or 2, maybe a corner. I don't know.
Yeah, I would think offensive line for sure. Chris Ballard, even though I think he likes his defensive line group, if there's somebody out there that he thinks can help that group, he'll go out and get them. And then I think secondary as well is a place that they would look to maybe bring in another presence.
I was talking to Joel Erickson of the Star the other day, and he said 5. He thinks they'll bring 5 guys in. I think that's kind of high, but I won't be shocked. What people need to keep in mind, they are fourth in the waiver wire selection list, so they get prime choice of players. And I think this is one of the weaker top to bottom rosters they've had under Ballard. Depth, there's depth, there's players, quality depth, proven depth, and that's why I think he and his personnel staff are going to find some players on the waiver wire that they like better than what they've got.
And one more point on Ellinger, the reason that most years I would think, the teams would go with 2 quarterbacks and such. What is different this year is, call it the Brock Purdy rule, if you will, is that the teams can carry a third quarterback on their game day roster without it counting against the 46. The caveat to that being that quarterback has to be on the active 53-man roster. So if they want to have that third quarterback, emergency quarterback option to use in games this season, they have to keep the guy on the roster. It cannot be somebody on the practice squad.
Correct. And we're just going to see how it's an insurance policy that, let me see, would it have happened with it would have happened with the Colts once last year, I think, when Nick Foles got his concussion, perhaps. But it's just so rare that you need three quarterbacks. But, boy, when you need three quarterbacks, you better have a third guy, as the 49ers found out last year.
And then we already talked there. Our last point was kind of getting an offensive presence or a veteran presence for the offensive line, which I would highly expect that the Colts would do.
I could see two guys. I really could.
Yeah, I mean, it's to that point. It does not feel to me that they have any reliable depth on that offensive, quality depth, as you would say, on that offensive line right now.
One thing that people, I hear about on the radio all the time, well, boy, the Colts' second unit looked pretty crappy. But you don't, when you're playing these practices or preseason games or joint practices, it's not about having a second unit. It's about finding three guys. Howard Mudd always used to mix and match positions because he knew all he needed was like 3 or 4 quality guys at spots, not a second group, but 3 guys who can play here, there, wherever. And that's what kind of you see where bad line plays. You've got guys that are out of position or whatever. So, but no, they need to find 3 or 4 linemen that they really trust can be backups because they're going to need quality backups to play on the offensive line this year. It's going to happen.
All right, that'll kind of close the portion of the show with Mike Chappell as we talked about the latest in Colts news. Next, we go to Dave Griffiths, who's on assignment out in Philadelphia, covering the Colts preseason game and their joint practice with the Eagles.
Hello, loyal followers of the Colts Blue Zone Podcast. Dave Griffiths here in Philadelphia. Just wanted to check in with all of you as Chap and Matt kind of break down the big news items from the week. But since I am in Philadelphia, wanted to give you kind of a firsthand look of things that I've seen, things that I've heard here as the Colts get set to take on the Eagles on Thursday night in their final preseason game. But the Tuesday practice was quite the dramatic one for some right reasons, for some wrong reasons. Of course, the obvious what happened being the fight at the end of it that kind of cut practice about 15-20 minutes short between Zaire Franklin that started with Zaire Franklin having 1 or 2 good solid thumps in a row. And Eagles All-Pro center Jason Kelce very much taking exception to that and just beelining straight for him and decking him from behind. It was not a gentle push. It was not just a little like approaching someone and then and shoving someone. It was a full-blown sprint to him and hit him hard from behind. He was not happy in the moment at all and started a pretty big brawl between the two teams. Lots of players involved on both sides. Speaking afterwards, Zaire was saying that, well, I guess some teams just practice differently. Our speed isn't their speed or whatever. And he was saying that he thought at least that he had a lot of respect for Jason Kelce, said that he would hope that an OG, as he put it, would at least look him in the eye first, but that he would certainly look him in the eye in Thursday's game. So Zaire was ready to buck up and not backing down from anything that he did. And then Jason Kelce, very much the opposite, was contrite afterward, was very nearly, I don't know if he actually apologized, but seemed very apologetic post practice, saying that he delivered the cheap shot, that out of all the joint practices before, he's never done anything like that. So he seemed to take the responsibility for it, even though he said he didn't outright apologize to Zaire yet, just because tensions were very high between the two teams, understandably, at the time. So I think bygones will be bygones. I think they will bury the hatchet. I think they will talk on Thursday before the game gets going, and a détente will be reached between those two, and both teams will move on. I think ultimately there will be no hard feelings after all that, which was quite dramatic in the moment. Of course, if you end with drama, there was drama sprinkled throughout the day as well, as Jonathan Taylor was here at the practice, of course, in his traditional hoodie outfit, dressed in all black, sunglasses on out there on the field. And last week Shane Steichen had said Jonathan Taylor was going to travel with the team, but then earlier this week, we learned that the Colts had granted Taylor permission to seek a trade. So I wasn't totally positive we would see Jonathan Taylor anyway, even if Shane Steichen said last week that he was going to be here. But indeed he was. He was here. So Taylor traveled with the team. I thought something that longtime indie media guru Bob Kravitz tweeted was very funny. I don't know why Jonathan Taylor's with the team. Is he earning Marriott points or something? So it's true. I don't know exactly what he's doing with the team right now since he hasn't been medically cleared. But he's here. And so he might be on the sidelines on Thursday night. We could see him there, which would be a heck of a thing on the broadcast set to be on Amazon Prime there. So, the Taylor saga continues. And as I just think I'm sure that Matt and Chap will get into this a lot, so I won't do too much, but this is the next logical step, in this back and forth between the teams. A player wants a new contract. The team doesn't give him a new contract. If the player, then Jonathan Taylor took it to the next level, saying he wanted to be traded because he wanted to find a team that he feels respects him and his abilities more. And then no team is offering the Colts any legitimate deal that they would consider. So Taylor stays to his stance. He says he wants to trade. And so therefore, the Colts tell Jonathan Taylor, hey, you know what? You can go out and look. You go ahead. If maybe you can find a trade partner. So, I mean, if someone offers the Colts something along the lines of a first-round pick, they would probably jump at the chance to get out of this and move on and earn a lot of compensation for it. But I just don't know if there's a team out there that's willing to offer that type of compensation for a running back that hasn't practiced in 10 months, that is coming off an injury that's supposed to take 6 weeks to heal after surgery, and hasn't played and hasn't been on the field, not at all, and is still technically medically not cleared. So, and last year just had a down year after his tremendous 1,800-yard, whatever it was, 20 touchdown or so performance, leading the NFL in rushing the year before. So very much to be determined on that front, even though Jonathan Taylor is here with the team, and he continues to be with the team. He's out there on practice. He's hanging around with the running backs. He's dapping up Anthony Richardson out there on the field. So you look at him, and it doesn't look like there's any animosity between him and the players, for sure. But it's just an obvious position where it's an awkward situation between the team and one of arguably its best player, arguably one of its best offensive players out there as the preseason is about to wind up. So some of the observations that I had from the field, the Eagles' defensive line had its way, absolutely had its way with the Colts' offensive line for the majority of the day. I'm not saying every play out there for sure, but if you take the whole piece of work from even individual drills, and especially in 11-on-11, especially in the run game, the Eagles' defensive line was head and shoulders better than the Colts' offensive line. Jalen Carter, the rookie, the 9th overall pick, looked like an absolute monster. And you pair him with Jordan Davis, their second-year player, also from Georgia. You have Fletcher Cox in there as well. You have players like Hassan Reddick, who is one of the NFL leaders in sacks a year ago. And it was very obvious that the Eagles' offensive line did not match up against this Eagles defense, which is known for getting after the quarterback, right? The last year, I think they had the most sacks in the league. And this year they are primed. They stocked up again on the defensive line, like I said, drafting Carter 9th overall. And they look every bit one of the most difficult defensive lines in the league. So you get a look at where the Colts are against that, and it's not close. And to be fair to the Colts offensive line, I will say that they did not have the full complement of the starting unit out there. Will Fries was not in the lineup. Carter O'Donnell was there instead, and Ryan Kelly looked to be only out there somewhat. He was kind of limited in his participation. We saw Danny Pinner running with the ones from time to time. at center. And so you would think, based on that, going to backups in the interior, that a strong interior defensive line would do well, and that's exactly what we saw. We saw the Eagles do very, very well in that area. So the problems have not all been solved on the Colts offensive line, as if you would think they would, based on what happened last year. So there's still a lot of work left to be done for that unit before the season starts. And if you're facing elite defensive lines, based on what we all saw at Tuesday's practice, the Colts offensive line could struggle against that. Colts cornerbacks has been an issue, we thought, ever since, well, the Colts traded away Stephon Gilmore, and they were going young. And then since Isaiah Rodgers' season-long plus indefinite, I should say, suspension, knew that they were going to be super young out there at corner. Devontae Smith, the Heisman winner at Alabama, who's been in the league for a couple years now, absolutely had his way with Darrell Baker Jr. in this Tuesday practice. He had two plays in particular that were pretty long plays down the sideline where he just out-jumped and outworked Baker Jr. for the ball. One of them was just a long play. One of them was technically a touchdown. I think it was inside the red zone, just threw up kind of a fade over there. And Devontae Smith, not the biggest wide receiver. I mean, he's all of 170, 180 pounds. And he's not the tallest receiver either, but was clearly the better man on those two plays in particular, but throughout the day, I would say too, when going up against these Colts cornerbacks. And that's not something I necessarily saw from some of those younger guys as bad at other times, like when they were playing going up against the Bears, last week in the joint practices and in the game. But it was very obvious today, and that could speak to the fact, this is just me spitballing, guessing here, that there are different types of wide receivers. That's obvious. Like, there's your 6'4" basic physical guys. There's your Michael Pittman Jr.'s and Alec Pierce's. And then there are other guys like your Josh Downs, who's the slot guy. Devontae Smith is very much an elite route runner. He is a smaller guy that is shifty, that is on point with what he's supposed to do. He is quick and he has great hands. And if the Colts cornerbacks do better against bigger wide receivers, that's possible. And they struggle maybe against the smaller Devontae Smith type wide receivers. That could be something that we see this year. To be fair, Devontae Smith is a very, very good receiver. So to say that you struggle against him it's nothing to be embarrassed about, but it's certainly something to note as we just about wrap up the preseason here. There were a couple bright spots out there for sure. I don't think Anthony Richardson did anything terrible, which, I mean, you're going up against a great defensive line and a pretty good secondary led by Darius Slay, one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL. You don't go out there and do anything really stupid. So I thought he was fine. A couple good plays in red zone for the second unit offense, with Gardner Minshew throwing to tight ends, found both Will Mallory and Drew Ogletree in the back of the end zone, and wide open, both of them. On some very nice plays to get touchdowns working in red zone. So tight end continues, especially now that Drew Ogletree is back, as is Mo Alley Cox. Saw both of them returning from injuries. Tight end is getting back to closer to, if not full force now. While Jelani Woods is still injured, so it's not full force, but it's getting closer to full force out there. That is one of the units that you expect to be a matchup problem for other teams. If you can get all those big bodies and skilled bodies out there. Will Mallory continues to impress me. I don't know exactly where he fits based on what the Colts have, but he continues to make good plays throughout training camp, throughout preseason joint practice work. We'll see if he does anything in this game against the Eagles, but I continue to be impressed with his skill set, particularly as a receiver, obviously, at the tight end position. Along with Mo and Ogletree returning, DeForest Buckner's out there as well. We spoke with Zaire Franklin after the practice, and he was just elated to have Buck back. The way he put it was like, every 3 plays, Buck decides to go and wreck it. So to have him back there is notable as the season approaches. That his injury wasn't obviously too serious to be back for this joint practice. I doubt he plays in the game. Maybe he does, just to knock a little bit more of the rust off. But to see him out there in this in the game, in the practice was certainly encouraging. That he, as long as everything goes well, should be back and ready to go by the Colts by the kickoff to the season for sure. Some more things that I heard. I talked about what Zaire Franklin, what Jason Kelsey had to say about that fight. Shane did have a few things to say about Jonathan Taylor. He is never a highly verbose individual, which is perfectly fine. But he's even been less willing to share details about what's happening with Jonathan Taylor. He's just the guy who represents the Colts, who happens to stand in front of us all the time, us media all the time. It's not like we talk to Chris Ballard 2 or 3 times a week like we do with Shane. So Shane told me that, yes, Jonathan Taylor is still not medically cleared, and that he did travel, obviously, with the team. I think his quote was, when asked about the reports about Jonathan Taylor being granted permission to seek a trade, his quote was, I believe, "We're working through those things," end quote. So that's like I said, a really in-depth analysis from Shane Steichen, who for a long time has just been over answering Jonathan Taylor questions. Not like he has too much more to add to that anyway. Now the ball is in Taylor's court, with him being able to go out and try to find a trade partner. Shane announced that Anthony Richardson would start in this last preseason game, which I know has got to be disappointing to Colts fans somewhat, that like he starts in the 2 road preseason games, and those fans who went to that one home game didn't get the chance to see him live and in person yet. Nevertheless, that's what the plan is. And I understand, I think, the reasons behind it, that Richardson had a couple of different practices against the Bears last week, 2 of them, as did the entire starting offense. And you don't want to overwork the starting offense, particularly the offensive line, I think, that keeps pounding over and over again. You don't want to give them basically 3 joint practice / game days in a span of 4 days. So you don't want to start the offensive line. So thereby you don't want to start your top quarterback out there. But he is going to start in this final preseason game, get some more snaps. I wouldn't be surprised to see a similar ratio or a similar time frame as we saw in that first preseason game, where he'll play the first quarter and then step out and see Gardner Minshew and Sam Ehlinger come on after that. So yeah, those are my observations and what I heard from here in Philadelphia. Eager to wrap up this preseason. Eager to grab some Wawa down here and enjoy myself in the great city of brotherly love. Let's send it back to Matt and Chap to continue here on the Colts Blue Zone Podcast.
That was Dave Griffiths on assignment in Philadelphia, following the Colts there as they play their final preseason game against the Philadelphia Eagles at Lincoln Financial Field. The Colts will open their home season on Sunday, September the 10th at Lucas Oil Stadium against the dreaded Jacksonville Jaguars. For Dave Griffiths and Mike Chappell, I'm Matt Adams, and you've been listening to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast.